Good evening, everybody. I'm Karen Dare, the CEO of Communify Queensland. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all this evening. I'd like to start by paying our tribute to the traditional owners, our respect to them on the land that we meet tonight, the Turrbal people, and pay our respect to the elders, both past, present and emerging. I wanted to welcome our guests, thank you in advance, and we always forget or lose you at the end, but we have a little Communify goodie bag for you, and inside is some of our own homegrown honey from the Green Corner, so I hope you enjoy that and thank you for your time. Wanted to tell you a little bit about politics in the pub. It's been going for about 18 years. It's an initiative of the New Farm Neighbourhood Centre and it is sponsored by the patrons of New Farm. It's an opportunity for us to get together as a community and have some wonderful debate over issues that are confronting our community or our state or our country. So have fun tonight, guys. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. I wanted to introduce John McCarthy and thank him for emceeing and moderating tonight. John is a senior award-winning journalist with 25 years' experience working for the Courier Mail. John specialises in covering the mining industry, particularly its impacts on people, the environment, the economy and politics. This experience has given him a unique insight into how the industry works, who the players are and what they're trying to achieve. John, I'm going to hand over to you now. Have fun, set the rules, get everyone to play nice, and I hope you all enjoy this evening.
Thank you. So the rules are we're going to keep it nice and polite. That's basically it, so no fights. I'd like to introduce the panel, and it's a really very good panel. When Charlotte put this together, I was really impressed. On the extreme right over there, but not the extreme right, is
centre right.
Centre right is Michael Hart, LNP MP, and I think it's terrific that Michael has come to this because it's not exactly friendly territory for him around here. So, and you might notice that there's no Labor MPs here. So I think it's fantastic of Michael to actually make the effort. Michael was elected as a state member for Burleigh in March 2012 in the Newman landslide and was re-elected in 2015. He's currently the Shadow Minister for Energy, Biofuels and Water Supply in Queensland. Before the election, he worked in a number of industries, including aviation, manufacturing, and was a small business owner. He's actively involved in a wide variety of local organisations and volunteers locally as a Rotarian and a patrolling surf lifesaver. And if you ever want to have a bit of entertainment during the day when things are a bit quiet, you get on Twitter and watch Michael send barbs at Mark Bailey, the Minister for Energy. It's quite entertaining. Ben Pennings is sitting right next to him. Ben just said to me he's a radical, not an extremist. Ben is a social scientist and a 26-year veteran of the environment movement. He's travelled on the Rainbow Warrior 2, sung for the Dalai Lama and written a book of profiles on people experiencing homelessness. Lifelong soccer fan, Ben, loves watching the Brisbane Roar, the Socceroos and the Matildas. He lives in Aspley with his wife and children, some chickens and a mortgage. He is grateful that his family supports him in his current role as spokesman for the Galilee Blockade campaign, which is campaigning against Adani. Next to Ben is Dr. Joanne Everingham. She's a senior research fellow at the Centre for Social Responsibility in Mining at UQ. The centre works to improve the social performance of the resources sector. Joanne holds a Bachelor of Arts in Anthropology, Sociology and Government, a Diploma of Education and a Master of Development Studies, and her work experience spans the government and NGO sectors. She served for 10 years on the board of Oxfam Australia. That's very good. 4 of them as chair. Her current research examines the impacts of mining in rural and regional communities, and there is a lot of good academic work going on in that area. Alex Stenijevic? That's it? Is the National Manager of the Mining and Energy Services Council of Australia. That's a division of Australian Industry Group. He's managing a diverse mining and energy supply chain network across the country. And over the past 3 years, Alex has worked with industry and unions to develop workable solutions in areas of industry awards, skilling and pay. He has worked in industry in areas of workers' compensation, red tape reduction, industry licensing and environmental waste classification. He's focused on increasing the capability of Australia's supply chain networks, which is really important in the mining industry, and ensuring that there is a level playing field for local suppliers and Australian manufacturers. Imogen Zethoven. You told me it was like Beethoven.
I did tell you, yes. Zethoven.
Zethoven, I apologise. Is the Great Barrier Reef Campaign Director with the Australian Marine Conservation Society and has worked as a conservationist for the past 20 years. Imogen has led a global shark conservation campaign based in Washington DC, has headed up the Worldwide Fund for Nature's Global Climate Campaign in Berlin, has been a director of the Queensland Conservation Council from 1992 to 1994, was an environment advisor to the leader of the Australian Democrats. Which one was that? Which leader?
Cheryl Kerno.
Cheryl Kerno, okay. In 2006, Imogen was made Officer of the Order of Australia. Oh, congratulations for that. For service to conservation and environment. Michael Roche, on the extreme left, recently stepped down after serving more than 11 years as Chief Executive of the Queensland Resources Council, which is the peak industry body for the minerals and energy sector in Queensland. Michael was prominent in the media promoting and defending the sector. He now works as an industry consultant and serves on the boards of an industry superannuation fund and a disability services organisation. Michael is an economist by training and has held senior executive roles at the Australian Stock Exchange and in the government sector, and is a proud resident of New Farm. And I think worked for a couple of ministers?
Certainly for the then Treasurer Keith Lacey.
Keith Lacey, yeah.
And Deputy Director General in the Cabinet Office when Wayne Goss was Premier.
Right, so he's got some government experience, he knows how it all works. Okay. Michael, if I can start with you, just a question straight off. If climate change is real, as a coal advocate, what would you say to your grown-up grandchildren, and what would you say to your grown-up grandchildren about what you did to stop or reduce climate change?
It's a good question because we are in Australia, we're being asked to, by some groups and probably some people on the panel, to contribute by stop exporting coal to other countries. And what I'd say about that is a few things. First of all, of the coal we produce, about 2/3 of it goes into the making of steel. It's called coking coal. 70% of the world's steel requires coking coal. The rest of it is recycling the scrap. So coal, and that's in Queensland, that's the sweet spot for coal is coking coal. So 2/3 of everything we produce in Queensland is coking coal, and so I'd be explaining that. And I suspect that when my grandchildren are grown up, they will still be using products made from steel. In fact, they will admire the wind turbines that made of steel. 220 tonnes of coking coal in every 1 megawatt wind turbine.
Do you think at any stage you'd have to say to them, look, I'm sorry, but I had a role in this and I didn't stop it?
Yeah, well, what I think we need to be getting more serious about is accelerating the use of carbon capture and storage technology. I think developed countries haven't done enough. We've got about 21 large-scale carbon capture and storage projects globally, but that's just a drop in the ocean. And what the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change said is we won't achieve the goal of 2 degrees warming without carbon capture and storage. So I'm proud to say that I've been an advocate and worked hard around that, but ultimately it's up for governments and industry to step up.
So if I was to hand you a crystal ball, do you think if Adani is actually built and operating, do you think Labor will walk away from coal?
I don't believe so. Politicians have to play to multiple markets these days, but I don't think that Labor is going to abandon regional Queensland. Coal in Queensland, directly and indirectly, generates 180,000 jobs. It's 8% of all employment in Queensland. It's about 11% of the state's economy comes from coal. $3 billion in royalties this year from coal. That's a lot of nurses, teachers and police. So no, I don't think Labor's going to walk away from that at the state level or even at the federal level. Labor does have some challenging policies that we might want to discuss today around renewables and energy policy and carbon pricing, but I don't see Labor walking away from coal.
Okay, Ben, if I can just ask you a question. You ran for Lord Mayor for the Greens. You got about, 10% of the vote?
Yeah, more? Almost right on.
So that's generally what the Greens get in most elections, isn't it? Around that 10 to 13%
Yep,
mark?
thereabouts, yep.
Okay, so that's what the people of Brisbane thought of your policies. So what gives you the right to hold companies to ransom in your campaign against Adani?
Well, getting to party politics, which is not my huge big thing at the moment, as you may know, there's a difference between the Greens and the other parties, as we don't accept money from the fossil fuel industry. We don't have $5,000 launches where people like Michael or whoever it may be will come along.
Well, that's fine, but the people,
that's
of Brisbane
important.
said, we give you 10% of the vote. That's a fair rejection of your policies. So what gives you the right now to hold companies to ransom?
I think it's really important to hold companies to ransom because governments aren't doing it. And my opinion personally is both the ALP and LNP are on the take, and they take money from the fossil fuel industry, the coal industry in particular, and they do all sorts of things that we don't know about. When we've got, cash for access, for example, we don't know who paid that $5,000 to see that ALP minister. They're not going to tell us. And I think that's really, really important because when, what I believe is that people, politicians, aren't doing what people want. And Labor Party went to the last election with save the reef, 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 and now they're doing everything they can to support Adani.
Okay.
And to us, that is completely insane. And the question you asked, Michael, is really important because climate change is not the elephant in the room, it is the room. It's everything, and it's going to affect everyone, whether that's our kids, our grandkids, and we're not talking about some airy-fairy in the future type scenario. We're seeing extreme weather events now. And if you read not what I say or Greenpeace says or whoever, you read what the World Bank says or the UN or Oxfam or whoever it may be, we're talking about hundreds of millions of lives.
Okay.
That's what climate change means.
Sure. Okay, Michael, you were shaking your head there.
Well, look, John, all we ever hear is the reef, the reef, the reef, or renewable energy, renewable energy, renewable energy, but we don't hear any argument. I'm sure those guys out there, you guys, are you happy to be paying twice or 3 times what you're paying now for electricity in order to get a 50% renewable target? Really?
I think so.
Well, I can tell you from the people that I see every week. I go to markets. I go down the town every week in Burleigh and all through Queensland. You're the exception to this rule. Everybody wants affordable electricity, but they don't want to sacrifice the climate or emission controls for that. So what we need is a technology neutral response here at the end of the day. Whatever is better, whatever the better outcome is to reduce our emissions, that's what we need to do, but it needs to be affordable. At the end of the day, if the lights go out None of us have got any power. We can't produce anything. That's not going to save the world, I can tell you.
Okay. Joanne, now you've done a lot of work on the social impacts of mining. Is there an overwhelming benefit or a negative to mining in Queensland, to society?
So it's not a very easy scales to weigh up for a lot of reasons. For example, most aspects of mining, or most of the impacts of mining, have both bad and good associated with them. Not that some things are bad and some things are good, but the exact same thing about it is both bad and good. So, for example, most regional areas of Australia would like to have something that boosts their population, and that means that the young people of their community don't have to go away to have a hope of an education and a job and stuff like that. Mining gives that population boost to some regions. However, that influx of population is very difficult for many regions to cope with, and it's not everybody who gets the opportunity at the jobs. It's very unequally spread. So, yes, to have a scales and to say it's imbalance, it's good, or imbalance, it's bad, is actually a very difficult thing to say. However, that is the measure of if we've got responsible mining. Imbalance, or overall, it has to have a benefit for the community, and it has to leave a positive legacy in the future. Else we couldn't really say it had been done responsibly.
So there's a lot of talk in the community about social licence, whether a company or an industry has a social licence to operate. Now, you would have looked at that sort of thing. Do you think that, generally speaking, there is a social licence there?
Well, there certainly is research that shows that the social licence, and again, it's not a singular thing actually, because obviously some people are happy to give a social licence to mining and others aren't. So, for instance, in Australia, people in mining regions, mining communities, are usually more accepting and positive towards mining than people in the cities. And nor is a social licence to operate something that lasts forever and never has to be dealt with again. So a social licence to operate is very closely correlated to lots of things, including the impacts of the operation and the behaviour of the companies, and they can lose it much more easily than they can earn it.
That's certainly a factor of modern life, isn't it? That's become that way. So do you think there's a disconnect between the city and the regions on this issue?
I think that people are obviously... There's many disconnects and many incommensurate things. People are using different values, and it's not surprising to us that people in cities will have different values to people in rural areas. That's a long-standing phenomenon in Australia. It's not surprising to us that that not everybody in a community is going to have the same views. Communities aren't homogenous. That's one of the reasons why it's very hard to work out what the impacts of mining will be. They'll be good for some people, they'll be bad for others. When you get a inflation in housing prices, then landlords are very happy. But somebody on a fixed income in a mining community isn't at all happy about the fact that there was just a doubling of housing prices. So, yeah, so that lack of homogeneity isn't surprising, but yes, it does seem at the moment that there's a lot more weight given in urban areas to issues like the big global environmental issues than to the local impact issues that tend to be more important to the communities on the ground.
Okay. Imogen, if I can just go over to you. You've campaigned, environmental groups have campaigned quite heavily against Adani, against the coal industry. One of the big factors, of course, in the damage to the reef has been bleaching, but there's also nutrient runoff. one thing I've always wanted to know is why don't environmental groups campaign against farmers?
That's a controversial question. Environment groups have campaigned to raise awareness in the community about the impacts on particularly inshore reefs from poor water quality running off cane farms and grazing lands. We don't campaign against farmers. We campaign to raise awareness about these issues because it's having such a huge impact on inshore reefs. Indirectly, it's having an impact on crown-of-thorn starfish as little larvae. They gobble up the excess nutrients, and then that leads to massive outbreaks of crown-of-thorn starfish, and they eat corals. However, we need to get things into perspective here, and there is no doubt that by far the biggest impact, the existential threat to the Great Barrier Reef and to humanity, let's face it, is climate change. There is no greater threat to humanity than climate change, and people around the world, whether they are security agencies, whether they are local groups rising up all around the world in a global movement against coal, are raising the flag. We have to rapidly change away from this. It's not just, of course, my issue and my organisation, and other environment groups are raising concerns about the Great Barrier Reef, and let's face it, it supports 70,000 long-term, clean, sustainable jobs. These are secure jobs, they're good jobs, could last forever if we look after the reef, but they're all under threat from this existential threat, and we have very little time to deal with it. The window of dealing with it is closing, and scientists in our society today are the truth sayers. The more people know about this issue, the more scared they are. And they are saying, we have very few years left. The window is closing to deal with this issue.
Okay.
And we have to rapidly move away from coal.
Sure. Okay. Alex, now you're in the supply chain business. If coal mining was to stop tomorrow, what would be the impact?
I suppose we're focused on jobs and competitiveness. So one of the major factors that impact competitiveness are electricity prices. So if electricity prices go up, it's not just necessarily an instance of the product gets dearer. So the manufacturers can either absorb that cost or they pass it on to the consumer. You now are at the stage where companies are making long-term investment decisions, and a lot of this is not just about coal, but it's about our entire energy policy, Australia, and how we're linked in globally and what targets we're committed to reach, and we support reaching those targets. However, you know, for a company that's thinking about relining their blast furnace and they're saying, well, you know, the 2020 RETS targets, 2030, we're a bit, there's no real firm policy in place. If we're going to invest so many $1 million, we need some policy certainty around what's happening in that space. So you could see those people move offshore, and you will see them move offshore to other countries where they can operate in different environments.
So the end impact is that business will suffer, jobs will disappear,
potentially, yes, and all those people that are happy to pay 3 times their power price, that's great while you've got a job, but once you don't have a job, that gets increasingly more difficult.
Okay, Michael, I'm just going to swing over to you. BHP and Rio Tinto, both, you know, the 1 and 2 biggest mining companies in the world, they accept climate change. They accept that there should be a price on carbon. Why doesn't the Conservatives?
Well, look, at the end of the day, as I said before, the federal government have signed on to the Paris Agreement. We've set the target that's in place.
Yeah, but why don't
we need to achieve that?
Why don't they believe? Why has it become an ideological issue? Why don't Conservatives accept that there is a need for a price on carbon?
From our point of view, it's not ideological at all. At all. We're technology neutral. So if renewable energies have their place, don't get me wrong, they absolutely have their place. But right now, it's not achievable to go down that path, John. Right now, you're seeing places like Germany that has 47% of their installed capacity in renewable energy, but they're only generating 18% of their power from that. Instead of that, they are using nuclear power from France. Are you guys happy with all that? I bet you're not. But the problem is, if you can't pay your electricity bill, as Alex said, at the end of the day, if you don't have a job, you're not going to be able to pay your electricity bill. We're experiencing the last month, John, electricity prices in this state, wholesale price has been $312 a megawatt on average this month. Your normal electricity bill that every one of you guys is paying has about 7 cents built into it for electricity generation. This month it's cost 31 cents.
But admittedly,
So
we've had the hottest
you could
year
expect,
in a long time.
Well, yeah, but on that average, if that was to carry on, you could expect your electricity bill to double this year.
So a lot of people out in this audience tonight would just wonder why federally the Liberal Party is now making a decision to back coal. Why is it now splitting the sides?
We're trying to keep the lights on.
Oh.
That's it.
Just so
That's it, guys. We're trying to keep the lights on at the end of the day. We're trying to keep electricity under control for all of you guys.
Ben,
now, you can bit all you want, but at the end of the day, we're trying to do the right thing by everyone.
Ben, what do you think?
This is ridiculous. They're pushing supposed clean coal power plants in North Queensland with our money that will cost double. It costs double renewable energy. You're talking about these supposed wonderful clean coal power plants. I ask everyone here, go and look it up. It's double, if not more. It's more expensive. Otherwise, if it wasn't, why would we need taxpayer money to back it up?
Michael, you've been in the industry for a long time. What do you think? Is there is renewable the right way to go, or should we be still backing coal?
My view in Australia is that the growth in demand for electricity, the growth in load, will be taken up by renewables. In Queensland, we have the youngest coal fleet, so their lives are much longer than, say, some of the plants that have shut in South Australia and Victoria. So coal-fired power generation will be a big part of generation in Queensland for many years to come, because they're competitive and they're more efficient. At midday today, Queensland was generating 9,300 megawatts. 1/3 of Australia's total electricity was produced in Queensland at midday today, and we're not 1/3 of the economy.
So if that's the case, Michael...
I'll just say what the numbers are. So the coal was 72%, gas was 13%, and 11% came from small solar, rooftops. That number, that 11% number, will grow because irrespective of the state government's aspiration around 50%, they're doing a lot to encourage growth in large-scale solar and wind, and many projects have been approved. And so that will grow. Will it be 50% by 2030? Probably not. But the electricity generation system in Queensland will continue to be underpinned by coal and gas, but the numbers will start to grow in favour of renewables. That's how I see the future. I don't see it as dramatic as 50% by 2030, but it'll be a number sort of north of the 9% that they were doing today.
Okay. Imogen, what would you say if someone came up to you and said, my community survives on a coal mine, all the jobs in my community survive on a coal mine, and you want to get rid of that?
I think that there are a lot of people who are living in coal communities who realise that coal has a finite life. I think that they are looking for some alternatives. It's not what you hear in the media narrative, but people know in those communities that we are moving away from coal, that the future is renewable. They are extremely disappointed that the government isn't looking seriously at alternatives.
So you're putting words in people's mouths.
No, this is the feedback that we are getting in local communities.
So when you say local communities, I mean, where are you? Mackay is saying this to you? Mackay is one of the biggest mining towns in Queensland.
Well, this is the thing that's important for us to realise, that people in Mackay, they know, they've lived through a boom and bust. They know ultimately that the coal industry has a finite life. Now, either we extend that life to the point where we're destroying massive amounts of biological diversity in Australia, huge extreme weather events, bushfires, people losing their homes, people losing their lives, or we take a different approach, which we need to do urgently, and look at what government programs we can look at, but also what community-driven initiatives we can do, so that we're not going down the track of a foreign multi-billion-dollar company from India apparently providing the alternative. It's not the alternative.
Okay.
The Adani project will die.
All right, okay. So in my reading of this situation, I read an academic paper the other day where they said that if we stopped producing thermal coal today, it would take 40 years for the weather to stabilise. So why do we have to rush?
Well, I think the audience has responded. Obviously, whatever we emit now, particularly with carbon emissions, will be locked in for many years to come. Methane less so, although its impact is far greater than carbon. But as I said before, the window is closing dramatically. If we're going to try to achieve the Paris Agreement limit of 1.5 degrees by the end of the century, we have no time to lose. We have squandered time. I've been working on these issues on and off since the late 1980s. I remember when Bob Hawke was the Prime Minister and he was talking about an urgent need for a 20% cut in our carbon emissions. I mean, we have just wasted decades of time talking about this. And we need to actually really grasp it. And it's unbelievable that the federal government is not only failing, but proactively going in the wrong direction. I mean, it is just... Yes.
Okay. So Michael, what do you think about that?
Oh, it's rubbish, John. Absolute rubbish. I mean, look, all we heard then was bushfires, sunspots, the reef dying, everything's falling apart all of a sudden. Where's the proof? Where's your proof on all that? Where's your proof? No. We don't want platitudes at the end of the day. We need proof.
I don't know what is. That was the worst bleaching event on record in the Great Barrier Reef, the third one to happen. 22% of all the corals in the Great Barrier Reef died, which will have an enormous impact on the 70,000 jobs down the reef coastline that
I'm from the Gold Coast.
Are so concerned
I'm from the
about.
Gold Coast. Last year we had a cyclone, all the beaches washed away, and all of a sudden that was a massive problem. We've done nothing about it, but all the beaches came back. And that's what will happen with the Great Barrier Reef. The bleaching, well, okay.
I'm sorry, you just don't know.
John,
hang on, sorry.
Right.
Can we let Michael just finish here, please?
John, you're right. I'm in a hostile crowd, but
yes,
that's
you are
fine. I'm happy with that. But look, at the end of the day, the bleaching that's happened on the Great Barrier Reef has happened before, and has fixed itself.
It has never happened this severely before. It first started in 1998.
Can I just say I was on the Great Barrier Reef myself less than 2 months ago
with Pauline Hanson.
No.
You're not changing sides?
Okay, come on, let's just let him finish.
I was on the Great Barrier Reef myself a few months ago, and I saw, in the area that I was in, I saw absolutely no sign of any coral bleaching.
Where were you?
Where were you?
I was.
You weren't at Lizard Island, were you?
Were you with Pauline Hanson?
Come on.
You see the problem here, folks? I mean, maybe you can, maybe you can't.
Come on.
This is all lies. It's ridiculous. Like, scientists are going to Lizard Island and many other parts of the reef, and they come up crying.
Where's the proof?
Go and ask them. Like, you get in a car. You get in a car. You trust engineers and scientists. You build a mine. You trust engineers and scientists. You get in a plane. You do everything your whole life. You trust engineers and scientists. All of a sudden, climate change. I know these engineers and scientists.
When was the last time you were on the reef?
On the reef?
Yeah, on the reef.
About 15 years ago.
Oh, there we go.
Can I just say
2 months ago?
Can I just say, I was on the
in?
Great Barrier Reef during the bleaching event. I saw it with my own eyes. It was extraordinarily emotional, seeing the death and destruction, the bleaching, the algae growing over. It was real. And for you to sit here and deny that it's an issue is deeply distressing.
I didn't-
And,
Okay,
and I
all right,
think, you
okay.
know,
Sorry, I didn't
you've
deny
got
it was an
to
issue.
actually go up
Okay,
there and
I think-
have a
Didn't deny
look
it was an
yourself.
I don't think
And
Michael
I'd
was
be happy
denying
to
it was
go
an
with
issue.
you.
Michael, you wouldn't...
Yeah, look, there's no doubt that bleaching was real. There's no doubt the biggest long-term threat to the Great Barrier Reef is climate change. But I want to come back to what the solution that's being advocated by some on the panel means. So leave the Adani coal in the ground in Queensland in the Galilee Basin. But Adani is going to build very efficient but coal-fired power stations in India. So they either get the coal from the Galilee Basin or they source it from somewhere else. If they source it from India, it will be dirty, much higher emission coal, a worse outcome for the planet. Now, why is Adani building these power plants? Because there are 300 million people in India that don't have electricity.
Can I please
Ben.
Yeah. So, and 1.3 billion people in the world that don't have electricity. So, and in India, they are going to apply the full menu of solutions, but the International Energy Agency says that India's use of coal out to 2040 will grow by nearly 150%. It will fall in Europe, it will fall in the US, it will even fall in China, but it will grow very strongly in India and Southeast Asia. And as an exporting country, we will continue to export coal, coking coal, and thermal coal for power generation into Southeast Asia and to India out to 2040 at least.
Imogen, you want to respond?
Yes. So the Indian Energy Minister has said that thermal coal imports into India will cease by the end of this decade. Thermal coal imports into India peaked in 2014-15. It doesn't make any sense for the Adani mine to go ahead. We know that
what they're doing is replacing dirty Indonesian coal with dirty Indian coal.
Can I also just say that the Galilee coal, the ash content is double the other black coal in Queensland. It is actually high in ash. It's a dirty coal.
Okay.
The key point here is that India is moving rapidly towards renewables. If we're concerned about energy poverty in India, we should be supporting and exporting our know-how, our technology in solar.
Yeah.
Because that's what's going to provide clean air in India and cheap power to Indian people.
Let's just make a couple of points clear here. You can never trust anything the Indian Energy Minister says, particularly about imports of coal, because they've been wrong every time. Ben.
And Adani is the biggest producer of solar energy in India.
Yep.
All right. Yeah, this is ridiculously important, this argument, going back and forth, and it's really, really important to put it in context. And it was interesting, earlier, before we started, Karen, who's the CEO of Communify, we saw here earlier, asked me to whether I wanted a wine, and I said no. And the reason I said no is because I'm an alcoholic. And I haven't had a drink for 8 years, and to me that's really, really important. But this whole clean coal thing drives me crazy because it reminds me of some of the work that I've done in needle exchanges and in homelessness and in prisons and schools. It's like heroin. It's like, come and have our good heroin so you don't get that dirty stuff down the road. Coal kills. It kills hundreds of millions of people, and it will kill hundreds of millions of people. Go and breathe the air. And this is really important.
No.
And it's like our supposed clean coal, which will kill you. It'll kill you less than their dirty coal. It's ridiculous, and they push it on poor people. The same as the tobacco industry. It's like, you guys have wised up a little bit and the science has come out and you believe it, so we'll go and push it on third world countries.
Okay.
It's horrible, and they've got an opportunity to have solar there. They don't need poles and wires and all that money and all the expense, and we're going to push this coal on you.
Okay, Michael. Just quickly, because I want to ask Joanne a question.
They've got, how many people in India, folks? 500 million, 350 million, whatever it is.
No, 1.2 billion.
1.2 billion, okay. So, and a lot of them are burning coal in little coking ovens. Imagine if we could produce electricity for that and stop that from happening.
Imagine if they had solar. Let's give them solar rather than dirty coal, or your cleaner heroin.
The problem is that they can't afford it.
Solar,
They can
I'm
afford
not
it.
sure.
It's cheaper.
Solar in India is the same
There's the
price
misnomer,
as
folks.
thermal
It is
imported
not
coal.
cheaper. It is not cheaper. In order for the Queensland Government to get to a 50% renewable target, it's going to cost $10.8 billion out of your pocket. You're going to have to pay that in electricity prices. If you're happy to do that. Right, so you're happy to do that, but I can tell you what, the majority of the 4 million people who live in Queensland, they're not happy for that because they work hard for their money and they can't afford it. So who subsidises it? Sorry, who is subsidising
the external
it?
costs, the externalities?
Who is subsidising it?
You are. You want to subsidise $1 billion to give to Adani.
Yeah, but
All right, okay. Can we just...
It's a subsidy. It's $1 billion.
Let's come back a little bit. Joanne, if we... with your knowledge of the regional communities, what would happen if we stopped mining?
Can I just make a comment about India? Before
Absolutely.
I do that at the risk of getting us back. But I don't think it's very realistic to believe that most of the energy that Adani will generate or will be generated with that coal in India is going to the poor people who are in villages and who can't afford. So I think that's a bit disingenuous to imply that we're going to get over the energy poverty. I also have to say that it's blooming humbling to go into Indian villages that do not have a mains electricity and find that they do have a solar panel and they do have biogas generators, and they have gone further with some small-scale renewable energy generation than we do in Australia, when we've got a lot of resources that we could put behind doing that more efficiently. So it's
a lot of those villages, though, they survive on maybe 1 or 2 days of 2 hours of electricity per day. So there is a real energy poverty there.
And absolutely, their solar panel is just one for a communal light for the village that they have their evening meetings around, and then they all have to go to bed because it's already too dark and that light stopped, like my garden solar lights do.
Okay, so getting back to the question,
Yes,
what do you think would, in your research of the regions, how important is mining, and what would happen if it stopped?
Well, of course, we don't only do research about coal mining, but can I say that one of the important things about any sort of mining is that it is a finite industry, and the mines will have to stop eventually. And so an important thing for them to be thinking about all the time is how do they phase their industry out and have some viable alternatives behind and a viable community still left there. And that takes work all through the life of the mine.
And a long time, I'd imagine.
And a long time to make it that there are alternatives for the mining communities. And, you know, if we face up to the fact that we've got to decarbonise our economy and our energy supply, we are saying we need to accelerate that work on the alternatives.
Okay, we've got to open it up to the floor, Ben, so if you just quick.
Oh yeah, there is alternatives to employment for people working in the mine industry in rural communities and regional communities, and it's rehabilitating the mines. There's 60,000 mines across Australia.
Well, someone's got to pay for that too.
Yeah, they do. The mining industry's got to pay for it because they made the mess. They've got to clean it up. There's these dirty skid marks all over the country which they caused. They've made their millions, they've made their billions, and somehow we need to pay for it. They need to pay for it because they made the mess. They've got to clean up after themselves.
Okay.
And it's the exact same skills. People working in the mine industry can actually clean up those mines. We can employ them while we transfer to renewables.
Okay, all right. So now we're going to open it up to the floor. Now, we've got a couple of rules. They're questions only. We don't want statements, okay? So let's keep this as tight as we can and as polite as we can, if you don't mind. Okay, so we've got two people walking around with microphones, and there's someone right up the corner there. I can't see it. You're in the darkness, so you're... Yep.
Okay. No worries. Hi, my name is Rubina. I'm originally from India and I travel there quite frequently. Can I just say that for hundreds of thousands of villages in India where there's no grid, there's no electricity, there are no opportunities. This is an opportunity in a lifetime where instead of, for a change, the developed countries, including Australia, passing on their bad technology, i.e. coal generating power, that we actually take something good to them and say, we can help you manage your electricity needs and get you to have more power in managing your electricity needs through renewables.
Okay, I hate to be rude, but what's your question?
Well, this is my question, and the question is, the gentleman on the left is talking about, beside Ben, yes. He's talking about who's going to pay for this all, very concerned about the 10.5 billion. What about the yearly billions of subsidies that government pays to the coal industry every year?
So I think that's yours, Michael.
What subsidies are you talking about? Give me an example.
The diesel subsidy.
Okay, that's one. Yeah, for sure.
How many billion is that?
Well, I have no idea what the number is, but it's not billions of dollars, that's for sure.
7.7 billion.
Yes.
Oh, well, look, that's...
Sorry, this is very uninformed.
Oh, hang on.
The diesel rebate.
Sorry.
The diesel rebate is a rebate of the road user charge embedded in excise for diesel.
And farmers get it back.
And is it $7 billion, Michael?
No,
I don't think so.
Yeah, no, it was identified in the
No,
federal
it's not.
government report about 3 years ago.
You're exactly right. We should be exporting what we do really well to India and other developing nations, but we've got to get it right here first. And I can tell you from the South Australian experience, we're not getting it right. There is a mix, folks. Renewable energy has its place, there is a mix, and that number hasn't been determined yet, but I can tell you it's not 50% because it will not work.
Okay, all right. Can we have another question? So, can't see. I'm kind of blinded here, so...
Yeah. My question's to Mike as well. Earlier in the discussion, you were asked a direct question about carbon pricing and why the National Liberal Party isn't supporting that and it's been rejected. I am aware that there's lots of evidence to say that that's a good way, but you didn't answer the question, and I'd like to give you the opportunity now to say why isn't the current government supporting that?
Well, sorry, I think I did. What I said was that it's about the cost of implementing all these things. We've got to, at the end of the day, do things that are affordable for our people. Now, we all saw what happened when the supposed 10% carbon tax was introduced. It was a job-destroying tax. It was an absolute job-destroying tax. Now, look, it's okay for these guys to say that closing our coal mines will shift all this work to renewables. But tell me, where are these jobs in renewable energy? Because once these things are built, once you put a big wind turbine up there, all it takes is 1 or 2 people for 50 megawatts of power to maintain the place, and there is not much maintenance either.
There are 2,000 jobs.
There is
in the
no
next 12
jobs
to
in
18
renewable.
months in
There is
solar
no
in
jobs
Queensland.
in renewable energy.
2,000 jobs in the next 12 to 18 months in Queensland.
You're just dragging that number out of mid-air. There is no jobs in renewable energy.
There
are jobs in coal mines. There are jobs in coal-fired generators. There are jobs there.
And how many jobs do you think coal-fired generators
from the supply chain industry
create when they're built?
We've got someone here who would know. Alex is in the supply chain industry. So what do you think? Is renewable a job generator?
Look, it can be, yes. I think historically it's been fuelled by subsidies, so whether you get an incentive to put it on your home and there's feed-in tariff negotiations and things like that, I think it'll evolve to be a more stable, standalone option. I think we're definitely transitioning into a low emissions economy. It's about how we do that. There's a lot of talk of divestment from certain fields. I think the only thing that's going to solve this problem is investment. To attract investment, you need policy certainty, national policy certainty. You need all levels of government to come in and forget the bipartisan party politics, and all levels of government need to agree on this. So if we don't have a unifying national policy, we won't get investment, and if we don't get investment, we won't be able to fund the technologies. Now, whether that's cleaner coal, and there is a place for cleaner coal, I don't call it clean coal, but cleaner coal, you can't just, I don't know if you've ever seen, let's look at payroll systems where they develop a new one and they turn the old one off, and you flick the switch on a new one and it doesn't work. We had a really good case here in Queensland not that long ago about that, right? So it's the same type of model. We are transitioning and we need to go about it in a sensible, logical way. We have the smarts. We should be exporting our policy solutions to countries around the world. The economics will look after itself. Is it viable? Is it not viable? The numbers will stack up. The transition will happen. It will be driven by investment, and we will end up.
That makes a lot of sense. Michael, you were
Just on the jobs, I think Michael and Imogen were both right. So the thing about renewables projects is that their job intensity is at the time of construction. And so it may well be that Imogen's number is right in terms of the projects that are mooted for the next 12 months, 24 months. But take the wind farm that's been approved up on the Tablelands near Mareeba. Once it's built, 5 people will maintain that wind farm. So that's the thing. It's a construction. The jobs are front-loaded; they're not ongoing jobs. Whereas, as Michael made the point, the ongoing jobs will be in mining, of course, are there for decades to come.
Who drives the trucks?
okay. All right.
No
okay,
one.
wait, no, whoa, hang on. Let's gentlemen down the
trucks.
front.
They're doing themselves.
There are no driverless trucks in
jobs.
Queensland coal mines.
Adani is planning to have
Okay.
driverless
Okay.
trucks.
Can we just? Okay. There's someone over here, I think.
G'day. I mean, as a person under the age of 25, it would have been really nice to see maybe a reflection of like my age and my generation on the panel in some way, and also by gender, which I'm a woman, and there's only 2 out of, what have we got, 6, 7 people on stage. It's also a very white panel, and a lot of the people directly impacted are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people.
That's great. What's
I've
the
got two really important things that haven't even been mentioned. It would be great to get comments on, mostly from Joanne and Imogen, as they've been making the most sense. It's about just transitions. So a lot of the questions have been about, what if coal mining ended tomorrow? Which I think is a really unfair thing to put to these people on this panel. Like, actually, what if coal mining ended in a really just way for the people who work in that industry? And the other thing is community-owned power generation. So Port Augusta, for instance, communities actually taking control of energy generation and how it's used. And I think that's going to be the way of the future, particularly for ending the energy poverty crisis.
I'm not sure. Is there a question in there?
Yeah, I would really love for the panel to comment on the demographics of the panel, but also these concepts of just transitions and community-owned power.
Well, none of these people on the panel actually decided who was going to be on the panel, so we can't comment on that.
We really appreciate it, but I guess it's more a comment to the organisers.
Okay.
We have one here.
Okay, sorry, mate. I'll get someone to you. Up the back there.
Yeah, thanks. I've got a quick view and certainly a question for the panel on dollars. We sometimes hear scary figures, and I guess a lesson for us all is whether it's a relevant figure or not. Our shadow minister here put up a figure of $10.8 billion as a fantastic, scary cost for reaching our transfer to renewable energy. And I think that was by the year 2030. I might be wrong there, but I've just done a quick calculation. $10.8 billion divided by an approximate population of Queensland today of 5 million, divided by 13 years, comes out at about $166 a year, or around about maybe 45 cents a day. For myself, I'm in a single income family, household earning under $70,000 a year.
So
I'm very happy to pay that. I'd just like to know if each person on the panel thinks that 45 cents a day per Queenslander is a stretch, and would they pay that for a future for our children?
Okay, Michael, was his maths right there?
He's got a calculator in his hand, so I suspect those figures probably are right. I'll accept your figures, but that's every person in Queensland. So nail that down to a family. Yeah. Yeah. So it's three times that, and then the people who have solar on their roof already, you take them out of the equation. There's 370,000 households that have that now. So the rest of the people have got to pay. They've got to pay for that. When you start adding all this up, yeah. Well, why don't we run a poll on it and let's try it at the next election. See how you go.
Can I just say that the Queensland government commissioned an independent review of how to meet its 50% by 2030 renewable energy target, and it found that it could do it without actually pushing up electricity prices. Oh, well, you'll laugh because you're in the opposition. But
the report hasn't been released.
Actually
I'm
an
interested to know
independent
how
review.
you've got it.
So I think the whole issue is redundant. We can do it, and we actually have to do it, because if we don't, the increasing cost of the externalities of using coal are going to grow and grow every year. And they're going to have enormous social and economic consequences.
Alex, just a very quick comment on electricity prices. And there's two distinct fields. There's the domestic market that we all have our home bills for, is on one scale, and then there's industry's cost. And depending on what industry you run and when you use power during the day, you hit spikes. And if you hit spikes, you are opened up to huge power bills. We're not talking 45 cents or whatever. We're talking thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in spikes when the grid hits it and you're taking supply at the wrong time. So it's not just as simplistic to say, I'm looking at my home bill and that's fine, because there's a different set of rules for industry's power consumption and industry power prices, and you know that needs to play into the equation as well.
Good point.
John, just on...
just quickly, Michael.
Yeah, just on the fact that the renewables report, the assumption was, in fact, that renewables won't add to the cost of electricity as long as taxpayers accept that the value of taxpayer-owned, government-owned corporations carry that $10.8 billion cost. So you destroy the value of your assets to roll out 50% renewables.
Okay. Sir, down the front here.
Hey, so it's not a question on the economics of it, because that's obviously such a complex issue, as we've learned, but more just about climate change in general. And earlier we said things like, when I went to the Great Barrier Reef and I saw these things, and when I saw these things in the Gold Coast, I'm not sure why we're not putting more... I'll make it a question, sorry. Why aren't we putting more faith in scientists like myself? I study environmental science, who dedicate their entire life to trying to present facts, and an overwhelming majority of people who support the facts on climate change. Why are politicians who don't have extensive knowledge in these areas saying things like anecdotal experiences of when they've visited an area and observed things? Because, like, truthfully, pretty much everyone in my field accepts these issues of climate change as fact. And with cuts to science, I'm wondering how much of the science on climate change is adopted in these policies, and whether there is more room for it to be taken more seriously than just the economics of it.
Before you answer that, Michael, can I just ask, is probably a needy question here, is do you believe in man's contribution to climate change?
Look, I've looked at the science that's involved here. My mind is not locked down in that, but can I say...
I just want to say that ours is, and we dedicate our entire lives to it, and we have the science behind us.
Let me finish.
Okay, you've had your go.
Let me finish. So my daughter's expecting our third grandchild today, tomorrow. It's too important an issue for me not to take this seriously. So I absolutely agree with you. We need to look at this scientifically, and we need to get it right. So we need more scientists looking at it, and we need...
How many more?
How many more years?
Come on, he's got a right to finish.
We need to get it right, and that's for sure. So when that argument is put across, I absolutely will read all that and look at it. And make a decision then. But look, at the end of the day, guys, it's you guys who make this decision. You can lead from the front. If you want to put solar on your roofs, if you want to put wind farms in your backyard, go and do it. No one's stopping you from doing it. But just don't rely on that baseload power being available later, because once we kill it, it's dead.
Okay, can we get another question? Got one over here. So, someone over this side?
Yeah, I had a question. The host before said, why should people... what gives Ben the right when he only had 10% politically within the Greens to go against the corporations like the mining companies? Yep. According to quite a few polls, on the left side, some of the polls were around 70, 80%. Even on the Conservative side, they were 65% last year when the News done polls on public opinion of support.
Okay. So your question is?
Yeah, so this is the question. For when they done a public opinion for whether they support or against the Adani mine, the public was 65% Conservative to 75% non-Conservative of not supporting the Adani mine. So my question is, what gives people like Michael Roach and supporters of Adani the right to give $1 billion of taxpayers' money, and will we get that back if the Adani mine doesn't go ahead and fail?
To be fair, Michael's not in charge of the $1 billion, but I'll let him respond.
Yeah, whether the federal government put some of the Northern Australia money into a rail line, what it would be doing is opening up the Galilee Basin to multiple mines. That's the reason. It's not just one mine. There is somewhat of a fixation about one mine that might produce eventually 40 million tonnes of coal to go to India power plants. Can I just bring it back to some of the reality? In Queensland, 2/3 of the coal we produce is coking coal to make steel. Now, I haven't heard no argument that we're not going to be using steel for decades to come, and if that is the case, then the world will need our coking coal.
You're avoiding the question.
Let me finish it. Queensland, in fact, dominates the global trade in coking coal, and so the reason that Curtis Pitt's got $3 billion of coal royalties, a $1.5 billion windfall that he announced in December, is because of coking coal. So when you think, yes, let's have a debate about where we're going to get our electricity from, but it's a bigger issue than just electricity. It's about the materials that we need, including our renewables. So if you're going to build wind farms, you're going to need steel, therefore you're going to need coking coal. Okay. So I just invite the audience to process that and come back at me with a question about, or some sort of fact about how the world will do without steel, and presumably those who drove here in motor vehicles, there's a lot of steel in that.
Imogen, just quickly.
So Adani is planning to mine the Carmichael mine in the Galilee Basin and send it to their thermal coal-fired power stations in India. So by talking about coking coal and steel production, that's sidestepping the issue. The Galilee Basin is one of the world's largest untapped coal reserves. If we start mining that by giving $1 billion of our money to a foreign multi-billion-dollar company with a terrible track record of tax evasion, they don't pay any taxes in Australia. We all pay taxes in this room. Adani doesn't pay any taxes. Their head company is based in the Cayman Islands, a tax haven. The CEO of Adani used to work for a Konkola copper mines in Zambia as director of operations, and that mine was criminally convicted for poisoning a river in Zambia when he was a director of operations.
You might be careful here, Imogen.
I'm just stating a fact.
There was a retraction in the media by people who blackguarded that particular gentleman and company?
I am talking about how the company was subject to a criminal conviction, not the individual.
Okay.
So basically what I'm saying is that the coal coming out of that mine is thermal coal. If it's burnt and if that mine goes ahead and other mines are developed in that basin, then we will blow our global carbon budget.
Okay.
We will
But
not
what if the
achieve,
power
we will not
plants-
stay under 1.5 degrees. And the power plants, I know what you're going to say, Michael, it's too expensive. It's not commercially viable to do carbon capture and storage.
No.
These ultra supercritical
what if
coal-fired power
Adani-
stations
Adani's
will
also in
not
the
achieve
power
the zero
business.
emissions goal we need to achieve.
Yeah, but I still have not had an answer from the panel or the audience. So if Adani, which is in the power generation business, one of their business lines, including solar, but they're building coal-fired plants. They're going to build them, okay? And they've already got large coal-fired power plants near Mundra, near the port. So if the coal doesn't come from the Galley Basin, leave aside the debate about the quality, the coal will be supplied from somewhere else.
No, well,
And so the emissions, because thermal coal is available, throughout the world. We don't have some unique monopoly on supply of thermal coal. The biggest supplier of thermal coal into the export market is our near neighbour, Indonesia. So if the power plants are going to be built, the coal is going to be supplied, and therefore the emissions will occur. So what you're inviting us to do is deny ourselves the jobs and the royalties for no benefit to global emissions.
As I said,
Can I
the
just
Indian...
add to
Okay,
you, John?
sorry, Michael.
The Northern Australia Infrastructure Fund is a loan facility.
Yes.
So the money will be loaned and they will pay interest on it.
How do we
Right.
know that, and
Well,
why? And
because
you
that's
know
what it
There
is.
was a poll
Okay.
taken
Ben?
looking at
And they will
people's
pay
support
royalties,
for that.
and they will create
74% of
jobs.
Australians said they
Ben?
don't want our money loaned to this company
Ben?
to build a rail link. 74%.
All right, you're right, it is a loan, but it's also a loan that gets paid back last. And like we're talking about thermal coal and burning that for electricity when we've got a huge amount of options there. But Adani aren't talking to doing that for like 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. They want to do this for 30 years. They think that we should be digging out thermal coal for electricity and be burning it for 30 years despite what we know about climate change, despite what we know about the impact on communities all around the world, about extreme weather events. But in 30 years' time, they still want to be digging out coal for electricity when they don't need to.
Okay, all right.
It's insane. It's literally insane, and you're letting them do it.
Okay, so I think it's actually 60 years. But
Yeah,
anyway, we'll
there's
get
60 million tonnes each year for 60 years. It's
So
just
there's
insane.
some more questions. Over here. So-
Hi, my question to the panel is, what do you think will be the impact on the environment with many businesses where there's a lack of confidence in supply of power, actually buying and installing their own diesel generators, and many households doing the same thing? The reason for my question is I actually come from South Australia and the power supply there is terrible. Again, the question is, what impact on the environment to all of the small diesel, etc., powered generators?
Well, that's kind of unknowable, but Michael...
Can I just give you a quick example, John? The Daintree. There's 350 people live there. They are using 3 million litres of diesel a year. They have solar panels and batteries and diesel generators. Now, we could do away with all of that by putting some wires and poles in there and using coal-fired or wind-provided or solar power into there for those people, and we could do away with burning 3 million litres of diesel a year, just in that one place alone.
Okay, so does anybody have an idea of what the impact on the environment would be from running diesels rather than...
Well, I mean, I think
It's a false
I don't
question.
think that's where, it's a false question. I don't think that's a realistic prospect. I think, in South Australia, you hear lots of stories about people who are increasingly going off the grid. They've got solar, they've got battery storage. That's the future. There's not a big move to move towards diesel generation. The other thing about South Australia is that that the federal government wants to blame renewables for it. It's not the renewables. The reason for this disaster is because it was an extreme weather event caused by accelerated climate change. And it was the national electricity market being such a mess, which is why it's so important that the chief scientist, Dr. Alan Finkel, is doing a review on the national electricity market to actually create more certainty and security in it as we move towards a renewable-dominated energy market.
Yeah. I agree with Imogen that what South Australia has taught us is that there are some improvements to the way the national energy market can and should operate, which probably has to include an incentive for power supply of capacity. So the South Australian problem was they lost all of their baseload in short measure, and gas wasn't able to gear up quickly enough to fill the gap. So South Australia we can learn from, will improve the national electricity market. Just on the diesel thing, people seem to forget the other major electricity crisis in the last year was in Tasmania.
They ran out of hydro,
Tasmania, the interconnector failed. And how did Tasmania fill that gap? Well, the dams were pretty well dry. They hadn't invested in solar in the way that we have in Queensland. So the Tasmanian government madly rolled out all these 1 megawatt diesel generation plants. Now, fortunately for South Australia, the rains came, the hydro kicked back into gear. But these are the lessons we need to learn as a country to get the national electricity market right, because the percentage of renewables is going to grow in every state. I see the investments that are being rolled out in Queensland. We're playing catch up in Queensland, and we just need to make sure we get that balance right between the need for that baseload power from coal and gas as we grow our share of renewables.
Okay, we've got another question. Yep.
Thank you. Given that per capita we are among the biggest emitters, and of course as a lucky country we're now exporting lots of our coal to around the world, how much of a moral obligation have we got to increase our refugee intake, given that countries like China, India are having to stop work and people can't go to work because of the air quality? When those people say to us, okay, we no longer can live in our countries, how many more refugees will Australia take in, given that we have done so much to the world in terms of climate change?
Michael's put his hand up for that one, so I'll let him deal with it.
China produces about 3 billion tonnes of coal a year. We produce 240 million. India is trying to double their domestic coal production to about 1 billion tonnes. So the numbers that are generated in those countries compared to our contribution are just huge. So go and have a look at the commitments that these countries have made to achieving their Paris goals. And you'll see in the Indian government's commitments, they are very boldly stating that coal will be a long-term solution to their power generation needs. But what India is doing is committing to rolling out the high efficiency, lower emissions coal plants. So the lower emitting plants. It's going to be coal, but that's what India is committing to. In fact, there's probably a dozen countries whose commitments under the Paris Agreement feature the importance of the new technology of coal-fired power generation. That is the reality. That is their choice. That is the Indian government. The Indian government, we can't be, you want us to preach to India, you want us to feel good by not sending our coal to India when the Indian government itself is trying to double its coal production. And in fact, the International Energy Agency says that India's use of coal out to 2040 will grow by about 150%. We're in the preaching business here, not the practical reality of what sovereign governments have chosen to do is their contribution to the Paris Agreement, and that's what India has committed to.
Imogen's
I just wanted to
chairman
make a
of the
quick comment. In China, the air pollution, as we all know, is so bad. I personally have had direct experience of it. I've been to Beijing 4 times in the last 3 years, and twice when I was there, the air quality was so bad, I had to put a mask on. It was absolutely unbreathable. There's a film I would encourage you all to see called Under the Dome. It was banned in China. After a few months, it went viral on YouTube, or their equivalent of it. It's about how people are just dying. Thousands of people die every year in China from bad air pollution, from coal-fired power stations and associated industries.
And burning coal in their kitchens.
It's a lethal industry, and they are closing, I think, about 100 gigawatts of coal-fired power in the next year. You can also, again, see in India that the International Energy Agency has projected increases in India, but the reality is when you look at the statistics, that year on year, imports of thermal coal into India are going down. As I said before, 2014-15 was the peak year.
So
there is a huge shift going on globally. We have to do it.
Just to counter that, Japan, I think, is opening up 45 coal-fired power stations.
Well, of course, they had Fukushima, and that had a dramatic impact on their energy production.
China's building 1,000.
India's building 770.
Okay. So in BHP's results today, they just so people know the value of coal in Queensland, they paid US $330 million to the state government in royalties. They made a profit just on their coal business of 1.8 US billion.
Why don't they clean up some of their mines?
Courtesy of steel making coal.
Let's not forget that the tourism industry generates more money for Queensland than any other industry, more than agriculture, more than mining.
But we're
it's
talking
about
coal.
tourism, and it's a huge job
Is there another
creator.
question on the floor?
Yep, back over here.
Yep.
Yeah, g'day guys. I just on the point of representation, I'm going to out myself as someone from a regional area here who's recently moved to Brisbane, and I noticed there hasn't been a terrible lot of discussion about the impact of this sort of thing on regional communities from the way I hear it. And look, I guess I'd preface by saying this is directed to Imogen and the other young man over here that, Ben. I personally don't want to pay a carbon tax. I don't want to pay anything of that sort as a taxpayer. And my question to you is, do you have a proposal that would allow people who don't support your ideas to opt out of them? So that's the first question. And the second question is, what realistic, concrete things can you put forward to demonstrate that your proposals will not impact on the economy of regional areas? Because as far as I've seen it, there is nothing to suggest that renewables have done anything positive for regional areas. So I'd like to know if you could answer that question. Do you have an alternative for people who don't wish to support your ideas?
Okay.
And there's a few answers to that if you stick with me. The first one is that we can't opt out of climate change. We can't opt out of the reef slowly dying, which is important because that has 70,000 jobs in Queensland. 70,000 steady ongoing jobs which are at risk. And it's tough because, we know about the PR war here over the reef, we know about the PR war over the jobs, and there's both sides saying, all sorts of things, and it's bloody confusing. But the real simple fact is we've got people making... people making billions upon billions upon billions of dollars in central Queensland from coal, and they have over time, and also from solar. Adani's worth about 6 or 7 billion. At the moment, he doesn't want to put his own money into Adani. He wants to put our money into it to risk that.
If you could just address the question.
I am answering the question. And as mentioned before, there is 60,000 mines around the country which haven't been rehabilitated. They've taken their money and they've run. Now, the exact skills, or almost the exact skills, like you've got your safety certificate number 11 or whatever it's called, all the mining skills that you can use to do coal mining or other mining, you can actually use to clean up those mines. And those people have taken their money and run. What Clive's worth and Gene is worth, and it's insane and it's obscene, and they're not cleaning up after themselves. if we make those people pay what they should be doing, which is cleaning up after themselves like we tell our kids to bloody do, those jobs are there. And they are there while we have a very fast transition, because we need a fast transition to renewable energy, which also employs regional Queenslanders. Look at the solar farms out the Western Downs area. They're huge. Adani's talking about a 300 megawatt solar farm, which may be PR, but we hope it happens.
What royalty does the solar farm pay, Ben? Ben, what royalty will be paid to the Queensland government? So we hand back the $3 billion, we shut all the coal mines. So $3 billion in Queensland government revenue goes west. What? Are you going to put a royalty on solar energy
to
replace
many, it? Many ways for the state government to make money. At the moment, it's coal and casinos. And that, both which have huge amount of harm.
I think Michael would argue that the tax system doesn't allow the state to do that. But okay, so if we could just move on. Michael, what do you think about that?
What was the question again? What was the question?
So what happens to the regions?
So, look, you're exactly right. If we start closing down these coal mines, we start closing down the use of these mines, then regional Queensland will die. You go out to Moranbah. No, sorry, how many people have been to Moranbah? So half a dozen of you, 10 of you have been to Moranbah. You go out to Moranbah, there's not much else there apart from coal mines, I can tell you. You close those places down.
Is there sun? There's a lot of sun in Moranbah. Okay. And there's a solar farm on the way close by.
Ben, if you could just let him finish.
Sorry, he's asking he's just telling untruths constantly.
So we're going to replace $10 or $20 billion worth of production with a solar farm. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, we can get solar. Queensland's one of the most perfect places in the world for solar.
And nobody will be able to afford it, Ben.
But Ben, it doesn't generate...
Nobody will be able to afford it. Do you realise how much
Can I ask?
solar?
This is a really important question. Yeah. All right, to you, how long have you been a politician for?
5 years.
5 years. All right, in your time, whether yourself and the LNP, what is the difference between the amount of money you've accepted from the fossil fuel industries and the solar industries? Now, should the solar industries be giving you shitloads of money? Is the question.
I haven't accepted any money from.
No, how much is the LNP?
And I'm not aware of anybody else that has either.
So you don't get any money from the LNP for your re-election?
No, I don't. No, I don't.
Where do you, who do you get it off?
That's another fallacy. It comes out of my pocket.
It's publicly available. So you pay all your re-election expenses yourself.
I do.
I bow to you.
Okay, can we have another question? There's a lady down the front, if you could move down. She's had her hand up for half an hour.
Hi there. I've lived in Mackay for 17 years, and it just seems disingenuous when folks like you, Michael, try and sell it to regional Queensland these lies, you're going to be able to you're going to put food on their table, providing jobs with these mines and whatnot, and you're giving the industry $1 billion loan. I mean, why not? I don't think people in Mackay really care about how their food gets on their table. So why not sink that $1 billion into renewables, and why not do that?
Sorry, they don't care how the food gets on their table? Is that what you said?
I'm just saying, I just don't think that they care if they're working in a coal mine or if they're working on a solar plant.
No, as long as they've got a job.
Exactly.
I agree with that. I agree with that.
It just seems
the question that somebody asked there before about the amount of numbers that we should look at as to whether we loan $1 billion to a particular company to do something and they'll pay interest on it. Nobody asked me whether I was happy to give $10.8 billion to the renewable energy systems, because that's what's in fact happening. We're putting in $10.8 billion. Now, it's okay for Imogen to say that things are cost neutral, but the Queensland Productivity Commission says $10.8 billion worth of subsidies, which comes out of your pocket in electricity bills, plus we are going to devalue the assets that you own by another $6.8 billion. So who's going to pay for that, ladies and gentlemen? You are.
Okay.
Can I just on the jobs thing, just come back to the... we need to understand that in a coal mine, there are hundreds, sometimes thousands of people. The mine gets built and then there are ongoing jobs, hundreds of jobs, sometimes in the bigger mines, thousands of direct jobs, leaving aside all the people who get jobs from supplying into that operation. Solar projects are capital intensive up front. I gave you the example of the wind farm on the Tablelands, 5 ongoing jobs. I think solar farms are actually more labour intensive. So the Clare Solar Farm in the Burdekin Valley will have 15 ongoing jobs. So say to the people of Moranbah that we're going to shut down your mines, the mines that make coal for steel. Have I made that point before? And there's about 10,000 people in Moranbah. I can tell you from the work that QRC did, Queensland Resource Council did, the vast bulk of those jobs are coal dependent. So you're going to say to the people of Moranbah, we're going to surround you with solar farms, and say we build 10 solar farms around Moranbah. Lots of lovely sun in Moranbah. Been there a lot. 10 solar farms, 15 jobs per solar farm. That's, my God, that's 150 jobs, and that's going to replace how many coal jobs? Well, there are thousands of coal jobs in Moranbah.
There's 70,000 jobs reliant on a healthy reef, and there's all the jobs cleaning up the mines which they've left. It's important because
it's a long way from Moranbah to the reef to commute each day to be a barista. Now, these are highly paid jobs. They're ongoing jobs, and there's just no comparison between the job generation capacity of a coal mine and a solar farm.
Okay, we've got another question.
Can I just make a quick
just
point?
quickly, Imogen. Yeah.
I'm just concerned that we're having this binary discussion about coal jobs versus renewable energy jobs. These economies are much more diverse than that. You know, there is tourism, the biggest job employer. There is health, there's education, huge export earner for Australia. There are a whole lot of jobs, community-driven jobs, food production, tropical health issues. You know, we need to be thinking big time, not just constricting ourselves to renewable jobs versus coal jobs. So that's something that, you know, communities need to be debating, need to be thinking about. There need to be processes from the bottom up to talk about what kind of communities do we want to grow in the future that are clean, healthy and sustainable.
Okay. All right. So we've got a gentleman over there, have we?
Can I read my question to Joanne? There's been all this talk about environmental issues and the science and the economics, and very little talk about the social impact. Joe, you've studied this. Looking at the big picture, let us assume that coal were to be phased out rather rapidly. What's going to happen to all those communities and families and people who've lived in the bush in those regional towns for a long time? Have the consequence of them being scattered hell west and crook to finding new jobs been considered?
Well, I should preface it by saying that we can't divorce the environmental impacts from the social impacts, because even though I don't study the environmental impacts, those are issues that have social consequences too, and that people that I do study care about. But what is going to happen? Well, we've seen industry transitions in parts of regional areas of Australia in the past. We know what happened with dairy deregulation. We know what happened with various other industry transitions when bullock drays were replaced by trucks and trains and so on. We know communities died. There will probably be some communities, and communities like Moranbah will be potentially among them. I don't think it's got a great future as a tourist destination. And so there's going to be some communities that really have very few alternatives, notwithstanding 30 years of rehabilitation work that most spent mines will need done on them. However, what we also know from those previous transitions is that different communities handle it to different degrees. And it partly depends on the resilience of the community, so the extent to which they have worked together, the extent to which they have started to think about alternatives, the extent to which a just transition and involving people themselves in their future has been part of the way that community operated. It also depends on the assets that are available to a community. So yes, one asset that many of these regional communities have is lots of sun, which will be very helpful for them, and if they're on the grid already and can feed into the grid, will also be helpful for other areas. But different communities will have different sets of assets that they need to be involved in saying what are the options for us in the future and what sort of alternative does that provide to what we've already got.
Okay, so if we take the point of Moranbah, it's coking coal. So I think it'll be still running when I'm dead and buried. I don't think that's going away anytime soon. So this lady down the front.
I have an actual question for Michael Roche, and I'd like to know your opinion on the viability of carbon capture and storage for thermal coal power generators, not coking.
Yeah. Well, actually, it's carbon capture storage technology is relevant to steelmaking as well. So it's a technology to capture carbon emissions, not just CO2, from a whole range of industrial processes, including coal-fired power generators. And it's the biggest carbon capture project in Australia right now is actually the Gorgon LNG project in WA, where they are capturing carbon emissions from the Gorgon project and sequestering them deep under the ocean floor. I mentioned earlier that we are way behind where we need to be with carbon capture storage, but we know the technology works. There are 21, by the end of this year, 21 large-scale carbon capture and storage projects around the world. They're happening. Japan is putting a lot of effort into it because of the transition away from nuclear. I'm coming to that. So the way, with all technologies, and it's happening in renewables now, the way you lower the cost is actually, you've got to demonstrate the technology. So the importance for the world has been that we have governments and private corporations that have banked billions of dollars demonstrating that the technology works in these 21 projects, which will grow to a bigger number over the next few years. China has some very large projects, Japan, US, in Mississippi and Texas, Canada has invested. So what we know from the technology pathways is you drive down the costs over time. But I would have liked to have seen us further down the track. Can I just read you something that was actually released at the time of the Paris summit? Environmental NGOs launch CCS report. First sentence, carbon capture storage technology, which can dramatically reduce carbon pollution from industry and biomass facilities, as well as gas and coal-fired power plants, has made great strides, but government policies are urgently needed if this piece of the climate mitigation portfolio is to be deployed widely. They go on to say, with a host of operating projects as living proof, CCS technology is a reality now and not a theoretical future prospect. But they go on to make the point that we need more, just as the governments have been pulling through renewable technologies with the RET, with the Clean Energy Finance Corporation and the Renewables Energy Agency investments. The point was made earlier, what I believe we need is technology neutral solutions, and we're not doing enough on the carbon capture and storage front. And these 10 global NGOs, environmental NGOs, including Australia's own Climate Institute, put their name to this statement at the time of the Paris Accord. And what I said earlier, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change said in the lead up to the Paris meeting that we won't achieve our targets on warming without carbon capture and storage, because coal is going to be used for decades to come. So wouldn't it be better if it's being used with the best of breed technology, which is carbon capture and storage?
Okay.
Can I just say CCS is not economically viable. We could invest billions of dollars of public funds into attempting to make it, which will take several more years. We don't have the time. We have a technology that is viable, solar and wind. It's booming globally.
Yep.
We just need to put our money there,
Okay.
not into a $1 billion loan to
Okay,
Adani.
just Ben, quickly.
Yeah, and there is, talking about technology-free CCS, it's called coal. You just leave it in the ground. It's easy.
Okay.
It sits there. Now, this is really important because these guys, they live in la-la land. It's,
Yeah, okay.
No,
okay.
they're sorry.
No,
They're-
sorry.
This is important because
Yes.
they think that we're not going to fight for this. Like you mentioned the Daintree. His party wanted to destroy the Daintree and we saved it.
Okay.
They wanted to destroy Fraser Island. We saved it. They wanted to destroy the reef. We'll save it.
Okay.
And now it
Simple as
generates
that.
billions of dollars every year.
We
it
have-
generates billions of dollars.
Exactly.
And
We have a
jobs
lot
for
of questions to get
Queenslanders.
through. Now, carbon capture and storage has been trialled in Queensland. It worked, but we have a big problem in Queensland. We don't have anywhere to store it unless we can pipe it to the Surat Basin or to a big gas chamber where we can put it in the ground.
What John's referring to is at the Callide Power Station near Biloela, a carbon capture and storage facility was retrofitted to that old power plant. It ran for 10,000 hours successfully. They captured some of the CO2. They actually trucked the CO2 to an injection point and injected the CO2 deep underground.
Yeah. So
where the industry focus is in Australia to make carbon capture and storage a reality here is not to invest in the front end technology. That's licked. We've got to get the costs down, but big companies like Mitsubishi and General Electric, they have this kit available and it's running around the world right now.
Okay.
What we don't have in Australia or in Queensland is the places to store it.
That's right.
And that's where the
big problem.
That's where the industry is putting the
not
investment
viable.
to
Okay.
find the storage places.
Okay, it cost a fortune to pipe it to the Surat, might I add.
Yes.
So can I just this person here?
Yeah. First of all, I have a comment on steel. Maybe not so set in stone as you think. There's been lots of breakthroughs in polymers and bioengineering, that kind of thing. But my actual question is, I heard improvements to the NEM mentioned before, and with increasing amounts of renewable energy, obviously these improvements are going to be needed. I'm just curious as to what the panel thinks those improvements would be. Are we talking more infrastructure, better policy? Like, what are those improvements?
You want to have a go, Alex?
Can you just clarify that question again, what it was exactly?
So the improvements to the national energy market, like we saw in South Australia, it's very old and it's not made for renewable energies. We would need improvements to it. So I'm just curious.
So it's talking
what
about the
panel-
infrastructure supporting the
like,
NEM.
is it infrastructure or do we need better policy? Like, what is it there?
A bit of both, isn't it?
Yeah, look, I think it is a bit of both, but it comes down to who's prepared to invest in fledgling technology and where do they see the returns on their investment and what are the biggest problems. So I don't really have a clear answer on, do you pump more money into solar panels or do you pump more money into small energy storage devices, be that batteries of some shape or form, all of which are currently being developed anyway, but I don't know that there's enough industrial scale applications of renewables being focused on. It's okay to say, look, we can power your house when it's the sun's shining, but if you try and run a steel mill or you try and run a huge refrigeration business or you try and run anything that needs large amounts of heat, I don't know that the scale's there yet. So it's a bit of catch-22. We'll employ the technology when it's there and you can show me it's economically viable, as opposed to, we'll invest in it when we can see that.
So essentially at the moment we've got a technology gap, haven't we?
Well, yeah, we do. We do. I think that the idea's there and we're starting that transition, and there'll be a lot of R&D some will break through and some will hit dead ends, but I can't tell you exactly what needs to be done first.
Just for those of you who don't know, there's a national energy market and it sets the rules as to where the power goes. I've got a little app on my phone here which demonstrates where all the power at the moment is going and how much it costs. So you can see there's an interconnect between Victoria and South Australia. Now, the NEM sets what happens when intermittent power such as wind and solar goes offline. It provides the backup power. Now, the whole argument that we're having here is about coal versus renewable. The real argument needs to be intermittent power of whatever sort it is versus baseload power. You've got to have that backup baseload power. Now, until we get to the stage where, say, batteries are baseload power, you can pump them up and then take them out at your will, then we can't get above a certain percentage of renewable power. There are some fantastic technologies, and the Kidston plant is one of those, where we have a 50 megawatt solar farm that is being used to power a big pump to pump water from one hole to another, and then it flows back the other way through a 450 megawatt hydro plant. Now, that works really well because you can use that when the sun's out. It doesn't matter at night, you just turn the hydro on and you provide the power again. So there's possibilities for the future, and that's what we need to keep an open mind about. I'm not saying for 1 second that we shouldn't move to more renewable power. What I'm saying is we can't do it just yet. We've got to have a staged process to do it, and the NEM actually provides that. So you're right, we need to modify the NEM, maybe build some more interconnects between some of the states, but then you've got a massive problem, John. Who pays for that? Is it the person who's providing the power or the person who's taking it? And I can tell you there'll be a massive argument between the states. That's why this is a national issue, and it needs to be solved on a national basis.
We've got a couple of interconnects. We managed to do it, so we could do it again, obviously. Yeah.
They were built a long time ago and they cost a lot of money, and they're not that big.
That interconnect that's out near Chinchilla, I think. There's one out there. That wasn't that long ago.
750 megawatt. There's another one at Terranora on the Gold Coast, which is about 80 megawatt. So last weekend, we were pumping 1 gigawatt, 1,000 megawatts of power into New South Wales when they really needed it during their heat wave. But they were paying $14,000 a megawatt, guys. Normal price of power is 7 cents a kilowatt. They were paying $14 a kilowatt.
And is it fair to say that we were able to do that because we've got a gigawatt of power on our roofs?
Yes, and that's right. And when the sun's shining, that works really well. But the moment the sun goes down, we've got a problem. And when you put in wind and the wind stops, like it did in South Australia, it got too windy.
Think we got your point.
Big problem.
Joanne, you were just nodding your head about policy, I saw.
Yeah, I think that it is obviously a combination of policy and the policymakers having courage and standing up and being counted and really taking on some responsibilities.
Well, talking about
alongside,
courage, that's a big thing to ask for a politician, isn't it?
And alongside investors, because we can't do it without courageous regulators and policymakers. We can't do it without investors, and we can't do it without the community and the power users being behind it.
I'm sorry, I can't see where the microphone is at the moment.
Can I add something to that? I think it's important because we've had a lot of long technical answers and discussions, which is really, really important. But I'm sitting here, it's driving me spare because the gentleman next to me said he doesn't actually, climate change is out. He doesn't know whether it exists or not.
Sorry, did I say that?
You did say that. You said you're not sure whether humans affected or not.
I said it's too serious a problem to ignore.
Despite 30 or 40 years evidence, you're going, I'm still not sure yet. But then you're trying to throw around evidence and numbers, but you ignore the elephant in the room. And it's, how do you expect us to take you seriously? How do you expect anyone to take you seriously?
I think that, we need to look at the global situation where scientists who spend every day of their lives looking at this issue are telling us, and this was a year ago, that we had 5 years left, the rate of burning fossil fuels and other things like deforestation and so on, but 5 years left before we blow the global carbon budget to stay below 2 degrees and ideally 1.5.
Sorry, they also
That's 4 years. That's 4 years
they
now.
They also said it wouldn't rain again and our dams would stay empty.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
They also said it would never rain again and our dams would stay empty.
So we have 4 years left, and that's why, there's just an enormous sense of urgency not to keep, thinking and chewing this issue over, which we have been debating in Australia, as you all know, for decades. We've gone forwards with the carbon tax, backwards. There needs to be a sense of, I mean, people have said a war footing and, a global Marshall Plan. There needs to be a far greater sense of urgency on this issue than what we're getting.
Okay, thank you. We've got a lady up the back.
I do have a question, but first one small comment. I do know of a solar company that had produced incredible technology to create utility scale power, but that was back in 2014. They were looking at working with the Saudi Arabian government to test large scale power plants over there. They're putting a lot of money into it. But because there was some question about the RET at the time, which was 20%, they were losing investors like nobody's business. And that's some really strong Australian IP that would have created highly skilled manufacturing in Australia. And I am pro-jobs and pro-environment. I don't think there needs to be a divide with that. One thing I am concerned about with the future as well is automation and the growing invasion of robotics, replacing humans on so many levels, and particularly for the supply chain guy. Like, if we're talking about, sorry, my question came into my head about 10 minutes ago when you were talking about jobs. If you're talking about jobs and humans working, what's going to be the future of that in 30 years when actually all these jobs are being replaced? Like, I do think we have to think much bigger picture with jobs and environment together, because it's going to be a completely different scene in 30 years.
You want to respond to that?
Yeah, look, absolutely. You've got new innovations like Industry 4.0, and I don't know whether it's workers in factories that would need to be as worried as much as potentially lawyers and accountants who are also on the hit list for being phased out and replaced by databases that can answer questions and scan lots of records really quickly. So yes, it is coming. What extent it will be, I don't know, but I can tell you I visited a manufacturer down at Yatala, and they employed robotics across their packaging line where they used to have people there. Now, that implementation of robotics actually helped them to redeploy those people, expand their markets, tackle overseas markets, and they now employ 10 or 15 more people than they did before the robots were in there. So I wouldn't be, in every case, it's not necessarily you're going to be made redundant by a machine, but the businesses are going to transform the way they do. If they don't, they won't remain competitive because the rest of the world is doing it, and that's just...
Okay, have you got a question? Because we've got one more to go.
I'm not against automation either. That is the future, and it's something we actually have to deal with. So what is the plan for that? Where can people go?
Well, can I give the example of... so we don't have in the coal industry yet driverless trucks. We do in a number of the iron ore mines in Western Australia.
And Adani, remember?
And so if we have driverless trucks in coal mines, so you don't have the driver, but what you actually have is the whole same people who have to maintain those trucks. So certain jobs might go. The advantage of automation in, say, driverless trucks is that there's just better productivity. But still lots of jobs on that mine supporting those, for example, automation. The other advantage of automation, particularly in the underground mines, is to get people out of harm's way.
That's true, and there's also
there's a safety benefit.
There's a centre in Brisbane too, as well, where the automation is actually done that employs a lot of people, and they actually they control the mine from Brisbane.
And can I just say also, there's an enormous safety benefit from moving away from fossil fuels. I mean, the increased frequency of bushfires, extreme storms. I mean, we've been seeing this almost daily on the TV screens over summer, the flooding, the torrential rains in Western Australia, the heavy hailstorms and so on, the damage that this is ensuing on people that, as a financial cost to them and an emotional cost and lives lost, we're just going to see more and more of this extreme weather. And so, this is always the externality of using coal and other fossil fuels that isn't factored in, which is why we need a price on carbon.
That's true. So, the lady in the green up the front.
Yep. I guess the thing we've talked about the community and the impact on the communities. If coal or CSG leaves, What about the impact it is currently having on those communities? You ask the farmers out in Roma, in Chinchilla, if they really like having CSG there. They've been kicked off their farms. Their children are getting sick. And what about the impact of... Have they asked the farmers in Aramac, Alpha, what's going to happen to them when Adani moves in? Those farmers are not happy.
Those farmers have signed agreements with Adani and...
They've been forced into it.
No, they've not been forced. You can't force them to sign conduct and compensation
farmers
agreements.
in Roma.
Those farmers are desperate for that project to happen because they're not receiving the compensation payments that they have struck with Adani.
Farmers in Roma were forced to sell their land to the CSG mines because everyone around them did. They then watched their livelihoods go.
Okay, I think you've got a valid...
There's a serious impact also on the mental state of the people working in the coal mines, the FIFO workers. So what about all of that? None of this has been addressed. We talk about the future. The environment and what it's doing is been well addressed, but the impact on those individuals is severe and high.
You're right, there is a very valid point you make about the impact on the landowners in these communities. And the traditional landowners, quite right. There are also, and I can tell you this from personal experience, there are a lot of landowners that are very supportive of it.
And making a lot of money.
And yeah, there are. So it's not uniform. Okay, so we've reached the end, I think. Yes? So I would like to thank everybody for taking part in this tonight. I think it's been a great discussion. Got a little bit heated at points, but that's fine. And I'd like to thank the panel for coming along tonight. No one got paid here. And thank you very much because when it comes down to it, debate is everything. We're in a democracy and it's fantastic. I reckon it's really fantastic that you've come out here tonight to debate a topic like this because it's really important. So thank you very much.